All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. This symposium coming up is called The Everlasting Trace, and the purpose of this entire section is to highlight the contributions of collectors and identifiers in entomological collections. So we will have a series of talks about those topics. For my speakers, I don't know if everyone is here yet, but I will show you a green piece of cardboard for whenever you have 2 minutes left of your 12 minutes of presentation. And then yes, so I will show you the green when there's 10 minutes of presentation so that you have 2 minutes to wrap up, and then the red one for whenever your time is up and it's time for questions. Okay, so first up we have Samantha Orellana with the talk Bilingual Tools to Increase Digital Representation of Latin American Collections and Entomologists.
Let's close this. Well, thanks everyone. I'm really happy to be here and to present a little bit about our work, mainly with Latin American collections. My name is Samantha Orellana. I am a PhD candidate at Arizona State University. And today I'm also representing the Symbiota team that is also a part of ASU and IDIC-Bio. So we have heard many things about digitization today. So I hope that this symposium and my talk can give you a little bit of a different perspective of how the contributions that collectors, researchers, and curators made in the collections can be a little bit more known using different types of platforms and outreach. So I just want to start by saying that this whole digitization thing, at least for me, 10 years ago, as an undergrad in Guatemala, I am from Guatemala, this tiny country in Central America, this digitization thing was a very distant dream. We kept working on organizing, trying to maintain our collections, but this year in particular, I saw this outreach post that came up from an ESA conference that was talking about how we could now digitize collections from our homes using this amazing platform called Notes from Nature. So I was like very, very, very amazed with this fact. Up to that moment, digitization for me was just typing on an Excel spreadsheet, and that was it. So since that very moment that I saw this, I want this for our collections. I want to have this someday. But you can imagine, for me, at that moment, it was kind of impossible. I thought this was happening only in North American, European countries, and that it was something that could maybe never be possible in Guatemala. And this was the reality of the representation of Guatemalan collections at the moment. Zero records that were available from Guatemalan collections at the moment, and all the way down to 2019. So the history is a little different when we take into account North American and European collections. More than 100,000 records were already available on the global aggregator GBIF. And this was mainly because of very hard work by many collection projects led by IDIC-Bio mainly. So a lot of the specimens, insect specimens available at the moment were from North American, a few from European collections, and other Latin American countries, none from Guatemala. So we had a lot of work to do to put our country in the map. Where should we start? we had no idea how to do it. So in 2019, I got the opportunity to go to start a PhD on Arizona State University. I started working on the collection, you know, the usual, which I love, working on the collection, collecting, preserving, labeling, identifying specimens. But also I started to learn finally how beautiful specimens could become into beautiful digital records. So that to me was the start of something that I was dreaming about like since many, many years ago. So what did we do? We started talking, or I started talking with my colleagues in Guatemala and in other Latin American countries to let them know, hey, I'm learning this and I want to show you, and I will. So on 2020, the very next year, with the help of my my PI, Nico France, and Ed Gilbert, who is in charge of the mainly of the development of Symbiota, they offer us a new Symbiota portal exclusively for the Guatemalan collections. So with that new tool and now knowing how to digitize our very own collections, we started working with the researchers in local collections. So from 2020 up to today, like 3 years of digitization, we now have 35 collections online, more than 47,000 records of Guatemalan specimens, including 5 entomological collections and projects, with more than 14,000 insect specimens now online, including also 9,000 images. So this portal in particular is the same as any other Symbiota portal. You already heard a lot about it, guys, earlier today with Andrew. So basically, each collection has their own virtual profile where they have access to different tools to digitize their own specimens. So basically, the collections are going to curate their specimens. We are going to digitize each one of the specimens in our Symbiota portal. And this is, I think it was mentioned earlier today, that digitization and databasing is not something that's an end, like it doesn't have an end. So you need tools, you need platforms that will allow you to make these updates, to add new images, to add new IDs, to add maybe DNA information of each specimen. And this is what we have with our Symbiota portals or any other Symbiota portal. So we, from each specimen, can have a digitized record, can have an online public record too, where you can access the point in the map if it's available. So with the special thing about this portal is that it's fully translated to Spanish. And this was very, very helpful for our community. And not only translating the platform, translating the code, but also generating all these tutorials and activities and reaching out to people and teach them in their own language. That was very, very helpful for us and very useful to have this kind of success. So recently, like maybe a few months ago, we made a poll, a survey within the Guatemalan users that are now more than 300 researchers, students, and curators from Guatemala. And 92% of them said that their preferred language is Spanish. So this is very important to have in mind that in order to reach out to local communities, we also need to find a way to have local researchers involved and, if possible, use local languages. This is very, very helpful. So after all these activities and all these work with local collections, we have many records online in our Symbiota portal. A lot of images, a lot of specimens, but is this enough? like only have them within this portal. Is this enough? Maybe it is. For many collections, it is, because they need mainly a platform to manage their collection, to update the information, and that's pretty much it. And it's very valuable, and it's what some collections need. But for example, we can also, from these portals, thanks to having global unique identifiers and to having built-in Symbiota installation to share data and images to GBIF directly, we can also mobilize every record further. So by doing this, we are making our records, we are making Guatemalan specimens records even more available for the community. So for example, now we have the collections profiles already on GBIF. And if you check the profiles, you can go directly to this beautiful platform called Bionomia, where you can find the researchers, curators, students that have been working on the collection. So this is also very important for us to have this recognition, to have this representation of local researchers that are working directly with the collections. So, for example, we can check different profiles within Bionomia and check all the specimens that have been digitized, that are accessible, and that have been collected or identified by the different Guatemalan researchers. Once we are in this Bionomia profile, we can check and we can go directly to the record on GBIF, for example. And if we go to the record on GBIF, we can go back to the record on our Symbiota portal in case we need to make any update, for example. So everything is connected, and this has helped us to work directly and not depending on any other institutions. For example, I know that some collections, not only like in Guatemala, but in Latin America, for example, depend on international institutions to upload or share their data online. But in this case, local curators are doing their own work. So it has been really useful to work this way. So if we need to go back, we go back to the Symbiota portal, we go back to the form. If we need changes or updates, there have been also questions like how can we make sure that we can update any maybe mistake that we can find. So if we find anything, we can go back and we can update every information that is on the form. And if we want to share it again to GBIF, just with one click, because that platform includes direct installation that sends the data right into GBIF. So really easy. So this interactive work has been very useful. And this is the way that we have been managed to going from 0 records online from Guatemalan collections to more than 47,000 in 3 years. And I have to say, without any kind of funding. So this is what we have been doing. So thank you. So there are many benefits. We are very happy just by digitizing records. We're very happy training researchers, but there are also a lot of benefits for the collections if they mobilize their records even further. So for example, within our portal, you can also check the individual profiles for the collections, and you can go to their GBIF records, you can go to the GBIF citations. So curators and researchers have everything there. They can just, with one click, go and find out how much impact their collections are having right now. And also in these profiles, they can go to their Bionomia pages, so they can check names and the contributions of each one of the researchers. So right now, our situation, we are already represented globally. We have records of our specimens from over 30 countries in our Guatemalan collection. So we are not only contributing to upload information about Guatemala, but we are contributing to upload information about other countries as well. So far, that's 47,000 records online, more than 38,000 records on GBIF. Some collections are not sharing their data to GBIF yet, but they probably will in a near future. More than 9,000 images and more than 5,000 species. We are also going to have this chapter about the whole process of digitization in the upcoming book, Biodiversity of Guatemala, that is going to be published probably by the end of this month. So it will be available online. The chapter is in Spanish, so that's to benefit the local community. So it makes sense to do it in Spanish, but we also have lots of information in English, and if anyone is interested on helping or developing material in other languages, you're very welcome to reach out to us. So working with Guatemala has been amazing. It's my community, it's my country, the people that I know, that I care about. But starting from this, we have also been able to expand our reach to different Latin American communities. And for that, we are also using ECDICIS, that is also, thank you, another Timera portal. So I am just going to say that we are working with different countries, including Costa Rica, Panama, Dominican Republic, that also have an amazing GBIF project that was developed last year. So just to finish, just if any student or researcher that needs to share their data, know that it can be done. The resources are there. And if you want our help, please reach out. Thank you very much. There's time for questions. Thank you.
Yeah. So we have about 2 minutes for questions. Any questions for Samantha? I guess I'll ask one. How do you feel is the impact of being present in the global community has been for the local community?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think that the sole fact of feeling representation, that you are represented as a community, has a huge impact, mainly on students. I can see that there are many students, many undergrads, many graduate students from Guatemala that are already working in the collections and that are interested in going to the collections. Believe me that before this project, we were like 2 or 3 people working in the collections, like not too many students were interested, but now they fight for having a spot there because they want to digitize their own specimens that they collect. They want to see them online. They want to grab their the records from Bionomia, for example. So people have the means to feel part of something. And I think that's very, very important. Thank you.
Mentioned that you did this all without funding. I don't know if you mentioned it in the presentation, but do you have any future funding that you're seeking out in this project?
Yeah, for now, not really. Probably one of the goals is in the future, for example, to apply for GBIF funding. It's a little hard for foreign institutions. So one option for Latin American collection, for example, is this GBIF bid funding that comes up like every 2 years, maybe. So maybe we will get a chance to participate next time. Thank you.
All right. Up next, we have Ainsley Ciego presenting on Blind Descent, Secrets of the Bar Cave Beetle Collection.
Right, thank you. I will endeavor to keep this to 12 minutes. Yeah, so howdy, I'm Dr. Ainsley Ciego. I'm a relatively recently new curator at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. And working there, it was helmed by a lepidopterist named Dr. John Rollins for many, many, many years. And every day I find new surprises. And this is about one of the exciting surprises that I found in the collection, or that was news to me. So, as you guessed, we're going to talk about cave beetles. I love cave beetles. You love cave beetles. Everybody loves cave beetles. There's something about being in a cave that makes you want to get weird and stretch your legs and go from being a perfectly good, cute, round fungus beetle to becoming a sort of a spidery lollipop, or going from being a kind of normal looking carabid into some kind of slender man beast. But cave beetles are amazing and mesmerizing. And this is a little story about a man who loved cave beetles. This is Dr. Thomas Barr. I think quite a few of you in this room may have known Dr. Barr while he was working. This is some photographs of him spanning the time from when he first became interested and fascinated by caves to his retirement around 2011, 2010. And he was extremely, extremely into caves. He joined the National Speleological Society as a teenager, basically the second he was allowed to enlist. He always wanted to be in a cave. He founded the local Nashville chapter of the National Speleological Society. They called themselves grottos. So he co-founded the Nashville Grotto, which still, members of which still memorialize him to this day. And here's a photo of him collecting his standard gear. This is a young Tom Barr. You can see he liked to dress like a miner. He's got his miner's helmet, he's got his denim coveralls, he's got his little handheld carbide lamp, and he's got a corncob pipe, because after all, this is Kentucky, I believe. And he was fascinated by caves from the first time he saw a mammoth cave as a young boy, and he was interested in the natural world. He pursued his studies at institutions like Harvard, where he did his undergrad, Columbia, where he did his master's degree, and Vanderbilt University, where he did a PhD. This is quite a lofty academic resume. This is really impressive. You could go on to an amazing career in international diplomacy or high finance, but Tom Barr was a man of refined and exquisite tastes, which meant that the only thing he could do was study beetle taxonomy and systematics. He preferred the carabids. That was his main focus, which is understandable for anyone who knows carabid beetles. There are heaps of them. They'll love to be troglobitic, caverniculus, hypogean. They just want to be underground and get long and weird and spindly. And that was the perfect group for Tom Barr. So he published on groups like Rhytini, Pseudanophthalmus, even a few staphyloids, like I said, a man of taste. Although every now and then he did slip up and discover a new species of crayfish or other non-insects from time to time. And he was, for pretty much his entire career, he was a professor at the University of Kentucky. This is important because if you want to study caves in the United States, this map here, this is showing us the dark areas. Each one of those black dots indicates a cave, a known cave or cave system within the United States. And you can see there's this one particular area of the country that is really, really dense and rich in caves. And that is Greater Appalachia, or Appalachia if you are a Yankee. So this was Tom Barr's home turf. And as a professor in Kentucky, he was right smack dab in the middle of it. And so he spent much of his career studying the cave insects in this region. This is a little illustration from one of his publications that's overlaid on top of that map I just showed you, showing the categories that he had designated for the cave region. So these sort of darkened areas indicated that sort of the greater bioregions that he was most interested in. So the Appalachian Valley, Cumberland Plateau, and then a couple of huge basins over to the west of them. So if you are studying carabids and you're in the general sort of Appalachian region, you're going to run into these two disreputable characters. These are two of the various Bobs at the Carnegie Museum. That's Bob Davidson on the left and Bob Acchiavati on the right, Bob Andrew not pictured. And the badass looking gentleman in the middle, again, this is Tom Barr in his circus clothes. And he took them on a few collecting trips. I got these photos from Bob Acchiavati and they really captured the spirit of cave collecting with Tom Barr. I don't know if it's an Appalachian thing or not, but as you can see, he continues to dress like a coal miner. He never isn't smoking. You can see from Bob on the right that headlamps had definitely been invented at this point, but Tom still has the Coleman lantern. That's a very important part of his entire caving philosophy. Here's two grown men teaming up to capture a single hapless Rhydini on the floor of a cave. As you can tell, they had a long, friendly, fruitful, collaborative relationship. And Tom deposited many specimens at the Carnegie over the years. But when he finally retired for good, he gave us the whole enchilada. In 2011, we were gifted at the accession record says minimally 21,487 pinned specimens of cave beetles, including 200 plus primary types, 6 file boxes of ethanol vials of mixed cave beetles, 40 boxes of permanent slides, because again, many of these are very small and you're going to need to make a slide. You might as well make a slide mount of the whole beetle. And 25 years of field notebooks. You can see this is an excerpt from one of his field notebooks where he's mapped out a cave system. He took incredibly extensive notes. His notes will say things like, I found 10 Rhydini, 15 Analinus, 3 Pseudophthalmus. I saw 3 different species of salamander. Here are the species of salamander that I saw. So there's all this co-occurrence data and sort of organismal interaction data that are in there as well. So we would love to get those field notebooks digitized someday because he was an excellent note taker. In the collection, we have about a column and a half of curated drawers. Much of his material was very nicely organized and labeled. And I will say that's not all of it though. I said this is a big collection. Unfortunately, the only thing that Tom Barr loved more than collecting cave beetles was collecting cave beetles and not labeling cave beetles. So he published very prolifically. He was a deep thinker and he loved to discover new species and discuss speciation and ecology and evolution. But he just I think he saved a lot of time by cutting out the middleman and not putting any labels on a lot of specimens. The specimens are in great shape. They just need to have labels. And so, I will have to point out that we've been working for many years, since 2011, to try to get those specimens labeled with labels that reflect the accurate locality that they came from, so we can actually organize them, curate them, and put them away in the collection. And we've been doing this on top of all of the regular daily tasks that we all have to do, like loans and curation and writing grants and outreach and teaching and things like that, which is why Bob Davidson's desk has looked like this for the last 10 plus years, and mine probably will too. But the really exciting part about Barr's collection is these big boxes full of vials of miscellaneous beetles, not just carabinids, but very many interesting, wonderful beetles that have just kind of been sitting around since long before he retired and are just waiting for someone to take a look at them. They look like this. See the haunting words in the top box say dry and desiccated, but this is really extraordinary. Collecting in a cave isn't very easy. Speaking only for myself, even mounting an expedition to go into a single cave and get beetles in there and come back out alive would be logistically impossible for me as a non-spelunker, let alone a person with a job and a child and all of that stuff going on too. And so this is basically hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cave expeditions throughout the entire Appalachian region. Bulk material, unsorted, waiting there for someone to look at it. It's basically a free collecting trip to a cave. And so I want to tell you a story about just one interesting beetle and how it fits into Barr's collection. This is the story of Horologium. So in 1932, J.M. Valentine described an extremely weird little cave carabid that looked like absolutely nothing else. It didn't have characteristics that would perfectly fit it into any group of carabids, any particular tribe. And he searched for 20 miles around in every cave that he could find, and he never found more than a single perfect male specimen. Whomst among us isn't always looking for a single perfect male specimen? Here's a picture of Horologian itself. Single, perfect. You can see the hourglass-like body shape that gives it its genus name. Deeply weird. It's got serrate margins on the edges of the elytra. Like, just does not look like a cave carabid is really supposed to look. It's absolutely weird. It was so weird that Rene Janel considered it its own family, the Horologionidae, I think he called it. And it's been sort of one of those things that's been moved around from group to group. People say, well, it's obviously a Bimbinii. No, it isn't. It's obviously Pogonine. It's obviously a Trecon. It's obviously this, but it doesn't have the characters that fit any of those. It's probably in its own tribe. It's incredibly weird. We really want to know more about it, but there's only ever been one found. People have been looking for this for nearly 100 years, and they never found a second one. So this brings us to this enterprising young man. This is Kurt Hardin from Katerina's lab at Clemson, who has heroically been going through some of these mystery vials to rehydrate the material within, get it labeled, sorted, identified, and then it comes back to our collection. And this is not just Kurt doing lots of great work for us for free, which we do appreciate, but as someone who is doing a PhD on soil beetles, little blind soil aniline carabids, this is a good opportunity for Kurt as well, because he gets a lot of free specimens and free data for his own research out of it. And what do we find? What does Kurt find in a jar from 1991? That's right, it's another Horologian. This is before and after Kurt cleaned it up for us. You can see it's a beautiful, beautiful shape. Thank you, Kurt. And it's not just this particular Horologian that's the solid gold that's lurking in those vials of ethanol material. Barr's material is supporting multiple students' PhD research. Again, these are both Clemson students. Thank you, Mike Caterino. And as is Kurt on the left, Pat Wooden on the right, who is studying Trechus, and both of them have benefited considerably from being able to access the collection of material that we have from Barr that was actually pinned and labeled. I would estimate that there's probably, again, like 25% as much or more unpinned, unlabeled, and unsorted that no one can access to research right now because it's still sitting in ethanol vials. So what I want to ask you is who else wants to go on a caving expedition with Dr. Tom Barr? If you're interested at all in the small, the brown, the eyeless, the really good stuff that's down there in the dirt and the soil and the caves and the leaf litter, there is material that surface dwellers like me would never collect in 100 years. And it's just waiting there to be observed, sorted, identified. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, if you have a student, a postdoc, or a colleague who you think would be interested in examining the sort of the cave ecology of the greater Appalachian region, drop me a line and we would love to have you come check out our collection. So thank you. Right, any questions? Yes.
Are there other orders besides Coleoptera and the vials?
He occasionally did collect some of them, but the emphasis is definitely on Coleoptera. So there may be the occasional isospore, the occasional other insectoid. Yes.
Are there any hypotheses around why a cave environment would select for body elongation like that? Yeah.
Well, I think for starters, you generally are going to be getting around with chemoreception and with sensillion, right? Like you're not using your eyes. You tend to not fly if you're in little tiny nooks and crannies, and so you don't need to have flight muscles in your, I guess that would be your mesothorax. You tend to get, you know, your prothorax and mesothorax will become very thin. You're going to be basically some long spindly legs, long antennae for extra sensing because your eyeballs aren't there, and then your gut and gonads, and that's pretty much it. And so that's my personal stupid hypothesis about why they get lollipop shaped. But if we have any cave people in attendance, I know Al, I don't know if you're familiar with any of the theories around why leptoderones like to be like that, but that's my hypothesis.
Thank you. Thank you, Ainsley. Okay, so next we have Ashley Weaving with the talk titled Shining a Light on the Moth Collection of Alice Blanche Balfour.
Thank you. Oh, she's a tough act to follow. I need to start with an apology because this coleopterist is about to go out into the unknown and talk about moths for a little bit. And if it all goes horribly wrong, Oliver has assured me that my British accent will carry me through. So here we go. So who was Alice? So Alice Blanche Balfour, she was from a wealthy family known as the Balfours from Scotland, and she lived from 1850 to 1936. But where in Scotland are we talking about? Let's take you over to the east coast. We're in the county of East Lothian, and it's about 30 miles outside of Edinburgh, where I'm based at the National Museum of Scotland. So this was her, small home, Whittingham House, which her grandfather built. And she was one of 8 children. Alice was actually the youngest of 8 children. Her eldest brother was Arthur Balfour, who went on to become Prime Minister, God, I'm in the US, Prime Minister of the UK for a short time. And he did not marry. So Alice, being the youngest daughter, the sort of duties of looking after the estate fell to her. So she spent an awful lot of her time looking after her brother's affairs and the property as well. So to fill her time, she was a busy lady. She had many accomplishments, but within these, she liked to travel. So she actually, she traveled extensively. One of the areas she went to was South Africa, and she ended up writing a book called, 1,200 Miles in a Wagon. So she was a published lady. She was also a very keen and well-known entomologist. So she was elected as a fellow of the Royal Entomological Society in June 1916. But what I really like about Alice is that despite her travelling to far and wide places, she really only collected in her home patch. So she accumulated a collection of about 10,000 moths and butterflies, just covering that county of East Lothian. So we're very lucky that her collection came to us at National Museum of Scotland, where it is cared for here at the National Museum's Collection Centre. And we're even more lucky that we had a volunteer come to work for us on documenting the Lepidoptera collection. So this was about 4 years ago, when we didn't really know what we had where and when. So Cathy Baird was coming along to do a species index for us of the leps. Now, whilst Cathy was going through drawer by drawer, cabinet by cabinet, she encountered this name that kept cropping up, this collector, Alice Balfour. And these specimens were from the same area that Cathy's from. So she got really fascinated, and then I handed over Alice's archives and said, well, why don't you have a look at these? And that started a really exciting research project for Cathy. I should say, actually, I'm talking about 2 wonderful female entomologists today, and that is Cathy as well as Alice. So this was an incredible meeting of these 2 women, separated by 100 years, but they share the exact same passion for moths. So what Cathy did was painstakingly go through Alice's archives, her notebooks, which not only detail all her specimen records, but lots and lots of observational records too. And this started a project for Cathy called Rediscovering the Moths of Whittingham, Alice's home estate. So Cathy got in touch with Alice's, I think, great nephew, and began trapping and monitoring the moths present day, with the aim of comparing moths from Alice's time with the moths today. And so, as I mentioned, Alice's notebooks are, equally as valuable as those specimens in her collection. And that's because Alice was a fantastic note taker. She really didn't just note down those interesting observations on behavior and biology, but she was also documenting things like the weather. But one thing that I really like about her is that she's very honest in these notes. So Alice documents things that we sometimes aren't very good at doing these days, and that's our fails. So we're not often very good at, shouting out on social media that we found no beetles today, no moths today. But Alice did this in her notes. So it's really refreshing to see that. So here you can see on October the 12th, went up to the Lammermuirs, these are the hills in her area of Scotland, in hopes of finding P. mixitana and P. macana. And P, what's the P stand for? I don't know. But did not see a moth of any kind. Nice and real. Again, L. literana, one after hibernation on a trunk of oak boxed, but escaped just as lid was being put on. Now, how many of us has that happened to? You've got that really good insect, I mean, beetle, and then the lid falls off. So I like her honesty. The other thing is that Alice had all these duties, but she didn't really enjoy them. And you can tell that through her notes that she was really bummed out about having visitors. So here she says, the weather has been beautifully fine and sunny, and we had a good many warm evenings, but one can't have one's guests and go off mothing. I would. And here she says as well, sugaring on September and October, very unproductive. Best fortnight lost to visitors. Nuts. So I feel for her. So through Kathy's work, then looking at the moths of then and now, I just thought I'd highlight a couple of those species. Some changes, some non-changes. One that you can probably all recognise here, the pepper moth. Well, Alice actually recorded this as rare, but it's now very widespread in the county of East Lothian. Similarly, poplar hawk moth, this is one that Alice hankered after, and she really didn't see it at all. So in her diaries and catalogues, she notes this as rare, but it is actually one of our most widespread hawk moths in the UK, and one that we get in vast numbers at the right time of year. There's some species that haven't changed at all, and that's the garden tiger. It is a species that's declined massively in the southern part of the UK, but in this area of Scotland, Alice noted it as moderately common, and it is still to this day, and an absolute beauty of a moth. Even this coleopterist could admit that. Another one that there's not really been much change of is this one called the northern egger, Lassia camperquercus, male on the left here, female on the right. I know a little bit of things. And yeah, this is one that you can still find in equal numbers today up on the hills near where Alice lived. But there, as we know, many species that are facing the effects of habitat loss and climate change. And this moth here, this small one called the red carpet, is one of those. Alice recorded it regularly on the hills near her home, but actually it's incredibly rare now and hasn't been seen in the last 25 years. And a couple more, the spinach and stout dart, similar to the red carpet moth, they have not been seen actually since Alice recorded them. And we know this because in the UK we have this incredibly wealthy history of recording moths and butterflies. So we can really go back to that data and look at this. As mentioned, Alice was also detailing notes on weather. She says, no doubt cultivation and unfortunately golf have exterminated many species. Climate seems to have had an effect, have affected the range of some, but this is somewhat puzzling and requires more investigation. So even 100 years ago, she was making these associations. So, you know, Kathy's project was fantastic in that it really started to unearth this incredible collector that we hadn't embarrassingly done much about up until this point. So she, as you've seen from a previous slide there, has created a blog, which you can go and have a look at. But it also caught the attention of the media as well. So as well as a couple of radio pieces and print articles, Kathy was approached to be involved in a BBC programme called Autumn Watch. I don't know if you've heard about it from this side of the pond, but it's a pretty big deal over there if you're into nature. Everybody sits around the telly and watches this. So it was really wonderful to see Kathy appear on this programme and not only have her work shared in this way, but also to highlight this wonderful collector, Alice. And so we did have her film a piece within the collection store as well, which was absolutely fantastic. And this spurred us on to do a little bit more within our own building walls, within the gallery spaces. We had an opportunity with one of our gallery areas being revamped. So this was previously called the Discoveries Gallery. I should say that National Museum Scotland is multidisciplinary, so we've got a bit of everything in here, science and technology, art and design, and we just had one very small new cabinet to play with. So within this space, we decided that we would highlight two of our collectors, Alice Balfour and Edward Pelham Clinton. And so when I say it's a small case, it really is a small case. All we could fit was just these couple of items. So Alice's sweep net, it was just about tall enough to fit this big net in, but it's a very shallow case. So we had to just have one small panel of her moth specimens mounted on the back of the case. And then for Pelham Clinton, we just had one of his diaries out. So we were quite restricted with what we could do in terms of this display. And so we asked if there was any other interpretation that we could have. Unfortunately, if you've ever done gallery work, you might know that you do have these restrictions placed on you, word counts, very, very small word counts. And so we didn't have too much to play with. So when they asked if we would film a piece to give a bit more information, I said, oh, okay then. And so we have a screen right next to this cabinet where we have a small piece that introduces Alice's collection and how it's being used. And we really try to get across to the general public that are coming in, visiting the collections, that it's like a library of biodiversity. Other opportunities that have come across is that I embarrassingly had to be on the front of the Scotsman for a piece in Women's History Month. And I say embarrassing just because I cringe at that kind of stuff for myself, but it was a real honour and privilege to be able to speak about Alice, as I have so much respect for her and really think that women like her deserve to be recognised more for their accomplishments. So that was really wonderful. But there is a huge amount of work that we need to do in terms of digitising her collection further and making all that data accessible. So at the moment, Katty's been focusing on those observational records that are in her diaries, and we have databased some of her physical specimens, but we have a bit of a bottleneck at the moment in that we're struggling to get our data out of our multidisciplinary database that we have to get it out to GBIF. But fortunately, Alice already has entries on Wikidata and she has a binomia. So as soon as we're ready and we can open those floodgates, hopefully we'll be able to associate specimens to her accounts there as well. In the meantime, Katty has published a book on her passion for moths called Meetings with Moths. Highly recommend it. Alice gets a lovely mention in there of almost a whole chapter. And at the moment, we're working towards doing some events next year for Insect Week, which is organised by the Royal Entomological Society in the UK. So we're going to be doing some more moth trapping events with the theme of Alice as well, and running collection tours. So really, again, this is a huge thanks to Katty. I feel that she really should have been here today to present instead of me. But it's really been wonderful to see this collection reawoken in this way. Thank you very much.
We need more questions.
Ainsley.
For the original collector, what would she have been using for light trapping back in ancient times?
It's a really good question. We have all her kit apart from that piece of apparatus. There are mentions of it in her diaries, but mostly where she's complaining about the war effort and that she was not, that there was a blackout and she was not allowed to use her light, but it doesn't detail what kind of light she had. It's a mixture. So the question was the use of common names. Was that used in Alice's time? The diaries, if I'm trying to visualize one, if I'm correct, she did use a mixture, but I would say mostly scientific. I have that bad habit because I present a lot to general audiences, so I often include a common name there. So that's bad on my part. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, so next we have Rachel Osborne with The Legacy of Charles Michener's Bees, the world's largest specimen level bee database.
Hello, I'm another coleopterist who is sadly gonna talk about non-beetles today. I've been a collection manager for the entomology collection at the University of Kansas for exactly a year. And you don't even need to spend 10 minutes in the collection there to understand the incredible impact that Charles Michener has had on the entire KU entomology collection, and also on the people who work there. Charles Michener was born in 1918 in Pasadena, California. His parents were naturalists and publishing zoologists. They really nurtured his love of nature from a young age, and He was inspired by the bees coming to his yard to contact two of the most important hymenopterists at the time, TDA Cockerell and Timberlake. Both encouraged Michener as a teenager to pursue the study of bees. And that's exactly what he did when he went to the University of California at Berkeley. He graduated with his PhD in 1941 with a dissertation on the morphology, phylogeny, and a new classification of bees. Later, after his retirement in the year 2000, he would publish the first edition of his book, Bees of the World. So his whole career, he's been very focused on bees as a whole. After graduation, he spent a little bit of time at the American Museum of Natural History as the curator of Lepidoptera. He studied Saturniids for a few years. He spent some time during World War II in the Army Sanitation Corps studying disease vectors that affected World War II soldiers. But in 1948, after the war, he was convinced to move to University of Kansas and begin his career on bees. And that's where he stayed for the rest of his life. And for the rest of his career, he studied bees in Lawrence, Kansas. His research was really wide-ranging regarding bees. He studied social behavior of bees. He was a pioneer in pollination science. He and his students published countless revisions of different groups of bees. And his collection that he built there was really the greatest gift that he could have given us at KU. Early in his career, he focused a lot on field work, going to various places in the world and collecting bees. He participated in repeated expeditions to Mexico for over 20 years, collecting bees there. In 1955, he got a Guggenheim Fellowship that allowed him to take his entire family and move all the way to Brazil for an entire year, where he established fruitful collaborative relationships with local scientists there. He traveled throughout South America and collected for that entire year. I'm told that his Portuguese was fantastic. So he really emphasized these really long collecting trips. He also traveled for a year to Australia, where he explored Australia and the Pacific Islands. And he spent 14 months in Africa, collecting in South Africa, Kenya, Cameroon, Uganda, Tanzania. He really traveled as widely as he could. And of course, extensive collecting in the US and in South America. I had to put this one picture of beetles, just one. I was packing a loan of Lemuriids a few months ago, and I noticed this series of lightning beetles that were collected by Michener on that 1955 trip to Brazil. So he was collecting bees, but he, like all of us, when we go collecting, there's bycatch. He brought back everything that he could. And so his specimens are really found everywhere in the KU collection. His efforts benefited the whole collection. But of course, most of them were bees. And his legacy really is the large, beautiful, active collection that he leaves behind. There are about 500,000 bees in the collection. And every year, we are adding to that collection. Almost 12,000 specimens are represented, and almost 3/4 of those are identified to species. 97% are identified to genus. So it's a really well curated collection. It's very active still. It has fueled Michener's research. It fuels research for scientists who came after him. It attracts dozens of visitors a year and lots of loans. I made this very quick, slightly ugly map just to show the distribution of the specimens. So the green parts on this map represent areas of the world where we have specimens represented in the bee collection. So you can see that the specimens span the world pretty well. Every continent, every biogeographic realm is represented. The dark green on the United States shows that many of our specimens come from the US, but it's pretty good distribution all around the world. Michener, he retired in 1989, but the improvements upon his collection continued after his retirement. Starting in the 1990s, with digitization, putting all those specimens, all that information into a database. This started, like I said, in the 1990s and sort of grew parallel to the development of the specified database through a number of NSF-funded grants. And today we have almost all of the 500,000 bees in our database, just about 487,000 specimens are in that database. So nearly every single one is in the database. All the information you would expect, collecting information, geographic information, determination history, and also importantly for bees, some notes on ecology and plant associations are pretty common in this database. Looking across the different distribution of families where we have different specimens represented, almost half of these specimens are from Apidae. And if you look at the various lineages within Apidae, the subfamily Apinae is mostly the bulk of our specimens, but especially Eucerini and Meliponiene. But there's pretty good representation across all of the various subfamilies and important tribes. And the non-apid bees also have really good distribution across the various lineages. I should note here that the halictid bees represent the largest chunk that are not databased. So I have here the numbers that have been databased. I would expect maybe 30,000 more halictids could be databased. So that chunk of the pie will get bigger as this work continues. There was a great poster earlier about the Big Bee grant, and KU is a participant in that. And that grant has increased the value of our database under the direction of Michael Engel, and now under the direction of Victor Gonzalez. Workers are taking high quality photographs of male and female representatives of bee species. And as they are creating those photos, we are putting versions of them into the database. So the value of the database grows even more. I was going to wrap up there, but I got a very exciting email yesterday, and I want to tell everybody here that KU is going to be hiring soon a bee expert. A generous donor has agreed to fund an endowed professor position at KU, working on bee diversity and evolution. So we expect the hiring process to open in August of 2024, and hopefully that person will start in August of the following year. So if you know, or if you are a bee expert who has specimen-based research ideas, please think of us and keep your eyes peeled for this really exciting opportunity. We are really, really proud, and we're really excited that this opportunity is happening. I want to say that all the information in the bee database are available publicly. We push our data out every month to GBIF and to iDigBio. And of course, you can also search a live version of our database on the KU Biodiversity website. But if you have any questions, or if you have particular interest in data from a particular group, please don't hesitate in contacting me or Zach Phelan, the other entomology collection manager. Both of our emails are on this slide, and you can also pretty easily find them on the KU Biodiversity website under the entomology section. I would welcome any questions.
We have plenty of time for questions.
Yeah. Yes.
Hypothetically speaking, if there were, say, a group of bees such as stingless bees that might occasionally be, or I think some of the other bees that might be captured with an Entomological or a Pseudocrypton leota or other small phoretic beetles that like to ride around on bees. Is that something that would be noted or noted in efforts, or would that just be kind of lead off stuff?
I certainly hope it wouldn't have been cleaned off. I don't know of any records that have that association that have been recorded, but that's a great question. I don't know. There are, not all of this, not all of the individuals are imaged. That's a much slower process. But as we are creating images, we are uploading them as quickly as we can. So I would say that the vast minority of specimens have images associated with them. I will contact you if I ever see a bee with a phorid beetle. Yeah.
A follow-up question. I'm just curious how you handle multiple taxa on the same pin. And the reason I ask, comment, I have to be proud that I recently caught an Andrina that my undergraduate and graduate student that had my very first Gypsiptera.
Nice.
A female, and all these larvae were climbing on that abdomen. And so now we have 2 records in the database.
Yes.
From that one pin. So,
Yes.
So how do you deal with that?
2 barcodes.
You mark
We don't come across that super often. Our collection has been culled several times for Strepsipterans in particular. So we don't have a very good, holistic, well thought out process for dealing with multiple organisms with one record. That is something that I have begun talking to the Specify folks at KU about, because the entomology database does not have a good solution for that. So I don't have a good answer for you. Yeah.
Please tell me the word there so that I take it.
When
you hold the supplement to spell out the guy's
I was saying that I certainly hope that any associated taxa that are writing on the bees, I was saying that I certainly hope that they weren't cleaned off and just destroyed or thrown out. But I don't know. I'm not the person who's taking the pictures, unfortunately. So I haven't seen this, or I don't know. Yeah.
Do you have any, I don't know if I missed it, information about the types?
The type specimens? Yes. All the bee type specimens are in the database, and type status is recorded. So they are imaged. The images are not as high quality as we're able to make today. The imagisters are a couple generations old in terms of specimen imaging, but they are imaged.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Technically, we have 2 minutes before our next presentation, so don't go away.
Start. Let's just go ahead and start. We have a break right after this one, right? We have a longer break.
Our next presentation is by Zoe Flores with the people of the MCC's bee and Tophila collection.
Right. Hello, I am from the Harvard University's Museum of Comparative Zoology. I am a curatorial assistant dealing with all the imaging systems currently at the museum for the entomology department. And we're going to touch on a few key agents and people who have collected the specimen that we have digitized thus far through the Big Bee Digitization Grant. So I just wanted to give a little brief history of the Museum of Comparative Zoology, mainly as its importance as a research collection for taxonomy, morphological data and research, as well as ecological data and research. The Museum of Comparative Zoology was founded in 1859 by Louis Agassiz, as you can see up there, and Samuel H. Scudder and Alpheus S. Packer started specifically the entomological collection in the same year. Louis Agassiz was a professor of zoology and geology at Harvard, and he was also the head of the Lawrence Scientific School there as well. The Harvard University Museum of Comparative Zoology has 9 different departments across its entire department of the MCZ. And there are 21 million specimens across these 9 different departments. In the entomology department specifically, we have an estimated 8.5 million specimen, which is the, if I'm not mistaken, the 15th largest insect collection in the world. And for the bee specimen, we have an estimated about 560,000 digitized specimen, excuse me. For the bee Anthophila under the Big Bee Project, we have about 60,000 estimated that are not digitized, that are under this project. We have gotten through about half of them, about 25,000 as of today, which is great. We've gotten through everything, including Caletidae, Andrinidae, Megachelidae, and Melididae, and we're starting Apidae, which is the largest group by far. The modern efforts are focusing on digitization. Starting in the mid-90s, we started imaging and barcoding the type specimens, so those are all taken care of, but everything else still needs to catch up. And we've been doing that and hopefully getting faster as we do that. And here's some images of the cabinets, the drawers, some of the bee specimen, as well as the type specimen. We are a very type-rich collection with about 36,000, if I'm not mistaken, types. All right, so what is Big B? We've already heard about Big B many times today, but just wanted to give an overview of what we do at Harvard in this project. It's an NSF-funded digitization grant for Anthophila collections across 12 institutions. It mainly consists of 3 steps. First, we barcode and enter the data for each of the specimen. We have an image up here, which is the standard barcoding image that we have for every single specimen. So it includes the specimen itself, the scale bar, the MCZ barcode, as well as any associated labels. And as you can see below, there's some unit trays with those barcoded specimens. And then for the 2D imaging, which is taken care of by the Macropod Pro 3D, which has a nice setup up there, we take exemplar images of each sex of species of bee, if we have them. So here's some examples of the bee, and try to zoom in here to kind of show the quality of these images here. And we're currently working on the 3D imaging with the Macropod system, and have some lovely GIFs, a little spinning rotation of the actual images, as well as a model I recently was able to reconstruct and present down there. For barcoding and data entry, we mainly first use localities and then connect events to those localities. So a certain time at a certain locality constitutes an event. These are some examples of the kind of combinations of types of data that we have. So the first one, we have both the locality and the time, as well as collectors, as well as other informations like the IDs and who it was by. The second one is a very rare instance. We have a date, but no locality. We have no idea where it was collected, but we know when, which can still be useful information for research. For the last one, it's the opposite of that. We have a place, but we do not have an exact date. And to get into the kind of the encompassing of this talk is that by researching these collectors, we can at least narrow down or even find specific dates to attach to these specimens that do not have any sort of date data. All right, here's just an overview of the MCZ base where we store all our online records for all the bees. And there's a paratype there. You can see there's its record and there's its individual row within our entire big bee data set there as well. And the images are attached to the records and then stored within our individual website. So for the statistics that I was able to run over the digitized specimen that we've done thus far, this is for the 24,000 out of the about 60,000 that we have total. We can see that there are peaks in about 1920 as well as 1970s there, as well as kind of a lull around 1950. But we have representatives from, we estimate 1800, but we do have specimens from that we know are from before then. We just do not have an exact date to attach to them, all the way up to 2019, actually. For this was a GIF, however, it was breaking the PowerPoint, so I broke it up into groups of 50 years. 98.87 of our digitized bee records have been georeferenced, which is actually a very large proportion. I would have expected it to be smaller. And then about 67.63 have both dates, known dates and coordinates from the labels. So we can see over time, 1920 or 1822, 1872 starts to populate. 1922, that first peak of specimen. 1972, the second peak of specimen, and then a few more since then. So for the individuals who have collected and identified, I was able to parse out the top 15 known collectors and identifiers here. The individual with the most collected specimen is William Morton Wheeler, with almost 2,500 specimen, as well as H.E. Evans, Charles C. Porter, Paul Herbst, Joseph C. Baquier, Ronald J. McGinley, Norman Lee Woodley, as well as countless others here, including an actual expedition that we count as an agent in our database. And we're gonna just touch on a handful of them. I would love to go over everyone, but these are a few notable ones. We have some major contributions, people who have donated a lot and collected a lot of this specimen, as well as some very historical contributions that I was able to research and associate to those specimens. So first off, we have William Morton Wheeler. He has about 10,000 total digitized specimen and about 2,500 bee Anthophilus specific specimen. About 19% are from specifically Colebrook, Connecticut. I have seen this label countless times, usually from, I think, about 1904 to about the 1930s. As you can kind of see here, a lot of this is from Colebrook, Connecticut. So I've seen this actually, it's a little small, but that unit right there is full of Colebrook, Connecticut specimen as well. And as you can see, he collected in Australia, Northwest Africa, Central Europe, or Central America, as well as North America here. And I included some pictures taken with the macrod of these specimens as well. This is H.E. Evans. He was the second most notable or major collector in the bee collection. He held academic positions at Kansas State, Cornell, Harvard, and Colorado State. He went to the University of Connecticut for English. Didn't get more information on that. I don't know exactly how he switched over to entomology. But his wife, Mary A. Evans, with whom he collected a lot of his specimen with, she got her PhD in science education at Cornell. She was actually the daughter of Cornell entomologist Henry Dykridge. And her father actually told her to not date an entomologist. So he was recorded as being very grateful that she ignored his advice there. And they collected in North America, and then there were some notable Australian expeditions as well, as you can see in the map. Robert W. Matthews and Janice R. Matthews, his wife. Robert W. Matthews was the only graduate student of Howard E. Evans at the MCZ. He was specifically studied insect behavior. And then he later became the professor at the University of Georgia entomology department. And after that, he now not sure currently, still volunteers as an associate curator at the Georgia Museum of Natural History. He accompanied him on his Australian expedition in 1969. You can see there on some of the collection labels. And then as well as Colombia in 1972. And his wife also, I could not find a picture of her. They wrote many publications together. So through one of their insect behavior books on hers as well. And actually going back, I just wanted to point out, Mary A. Evans, all their specimens were collected together except that second collection label under the map. She specifically scratched out his name to kind of attribute it to herself, and it is a pompilid type. So took the credit, made sure to get the credit there. Going on to the historical specimen, this record here, we only had the Sweden Jung label on all the specimen. And in the database, it only said Jung. And so I went in Google, did a deep Google search, and was able to find that this is Sven Ingmar Jung, who was a Swedish civil servant, naturalist, and collector from 1757 to 1828. There's not too much information. There's some biographical information on him. He was a visitor of Carolus Linnaeus's home. He actually attended his father's house as well as Linnaeus the Younger, his son, and joined Linnaeus the Younger on a 1776 trip to Lapland. And by 1803, there were an estimated 5,000 to 6,000 species. At first I read specimen, but this is species in his insect collection. His sons didn't take an interest and they sold the collection off around the mid 1800s. And the MCZ annual report actually said it is not named, but rather rich in specimens and quite well preserved considering its old date, which was in 1872, about 100 years after, and now we're 300 years. And it's some of the most pristine preserved specimen I have ever seen. And they're 300 years old, which blows my mind. Second one is Joseph Kriegtraumer. He came a little later, 1819 to 1902. He was a German entomologist. He has similar labels for Beria Kriechbauer. Also had no information, and I was able to associate the specimen to him and get a lot more information and actually go through his publications and collect a lot of information. And as you can see here, these are some of the spread wing ones. It seemed like an art form to them how they preserve these specimens. We have Karl Edward Adolf Gerstaker, 1828 to 1895. Also, some of these well-preserved specimens. He was a German zoologist and entomologist and professor. He taught zoology at the University of Berlin, as well as the University of Greifswald. And he doesn't have as many as the other two, but has also identified Kriechbaumer's types. And lastly, but not least, we have Ludwig Imhoff. He donated a lot of specimens to specifically Louis Agassiz. A lot of them only have these very simple labels of Collector Imhoff, as well as you can kind of see the handwritten labels. Those are the determination labels that are found on specifically his specimen as well. He was a Swiss naturalist, an entomologist, and originally a physician doctor. And basically, like I was saying, researching these collectors during these digitization efforts can provide these scientific and historical context for the museum collections. So instead of having generic dates, no date data, we are able to at least put a time frame on them and uncover these very historical specimen, as there was no data or any sort of information relating these specimens besides their label data. And having them up on this MCZ base, we have these little agent pages that are able to kind of show and display where these specimens were collected, when they were collected, usually has the biography of the specimen collector, their names, their publications, relationship with other agents, as well as obviously their list of specimens they have collected. So it's very fun to go in and research these agents and create this nice little page for them and kind of showcase their life work and history and hopefully supplement these specimen data. And here are the acknowledgements. I just want to thank Crystal and Whit, as well as Naomi Pierce and everyone else who had helped in the Big Bee project.
For one question. Thank you. Okay, so with that, we close the first half of these presentations. We are up for a break until 4, so 14 minutes. Please be back on time. So our next talk is a pre-recorded talk by David Shorthouse on motivations for sustaining a round trip of curated links between collections and their specimen records.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome. We're very happy to be presenting here at ECN 2023 to talk about the motivations, the importance, and the opportunities in setting up and curating the links between specimens and those who collect them and identify them. With that, imagine, we know that many of us have been sharing our collections data to the global community via the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. We've become quite adept at georeferencing, for example, our locality information, because points on a map have proven to be computationally useful and useful for finding errors. We've focused less on the utility of people names in our collections data, perhaps because we've not appreciated the value, or it's been perceived as an intractable problem. At present, people names for collectors and determiners are shared in a noisy, inconsistent way. See the slide. But we're here to explain that this is perfectly acceptable because the varied expressions of people names is a form of evidence or provenance. Instead, we make an argument that communicating identity requires an approach with a new shared layer and some citizen science-like activities to address the very long tail of unknown people names. Each of our own windows of knowledge on heritage are limited, but collectively, we may pull back all the curtains on all the windows. What's our motivation? Turning strings of people names into a computational layer that communicates shared concepts of identity requires that we figure out or disambiguate the strings. Many people share the same name, and many people have or had different names. The motivations for this work are many, and we'll list more, but they also include some of the verbs you see here: to discover, complete, track, measure, collaborate, and reveal, among others. The core of these desires can be summarized as us having a common goal to overcome institutional, cultural, and trust barriers to accelerate interdisciplinary collaboration and knowledge integration. If you'd like to, you may read more about our thoughts on what it means to disambiguate people names in biological collections and beyond, across the products of biological sciences. That might bring to mind what's in your collection or research database. Got people? We advocate for a layer of people identifiers that are globally unique and useful, but we recognize that there may be many identifiers for people, and so we should aspire to support many of them in our collections management systems. As an example, the ORCID organization. With your ORCID, consider that it's a not-for-profit organization, an international organization financially supported by national and regional consortia memberships. You have undoubtedly used your ORCID identifier in the submission of manuscripts or journals or grant applications to funding agencies. Another identifier is a Wikidata Q number, and from Wikidata, unlike ORCID, Wikidata accommodates demographic facts like birth and death dates with the inclusion of evidence for those facts. With these identifiers in mind, next up, David will tell us more about how this work can actually take place.
Thanks, Deb, and hello, everyone. I'm a public servant with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, as many of you know. But in this particular talk with Deb, I'm a private citizen with this submission. And the Binomi infrastructure itself is a self-funded project of mine and a personal interest that I launched in about 2018. But the seed of the idea germinated about a decade to a decade and a half ago. At its simplest level, as Deb likes to call it, a binomia is an enormous pivot table on people names. And those people names emerge from GBIF, or the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. Every other week, about 210 million specimen records are downloaded from GBIF and parsed for their people names, and then exposed into an enormous search engine. And then the interface in Bionomy allows you to find the specimens data of your own, or to contribute them or link them up to other people that you admire or revere. So if your name happens to be Ashley Whiffen, for example, and you have an ORCID ID, when you log into Bionomia using your ORCID, you begin to see some of the records that are potentially attributable to yourself, and you can claim them as your own. So in this case here, here's a handful that Ashley could claim as having collected or identified them. ORCID is used for the living in Bionomia, and Wikidata for the deceased. So when you go through this exercise, you have the option to auto-archive your records to Zenodo, an international organization that archives data, and their head offices are in CERN in Switzerland. So you can get a DataCite DOI for this work, and that data package then could appear in ORCID as an example or an expression of the data packages that you might have contributed elsewhere alongside your publications. So a number of people have done this and then padded their CVs with this data package because it illustrates the breadth of their field and curatorial work. Within Bionomia, you might also have the opportunity to actively link past champions to their specimen records. And here's an example of Terry Irwin with his Wikidata Q number, allow you to find his specimen records and link him up to those specimen records as they might be found in multiple institutions throughout the world. And here's a number of examples where we know that Terry Irwin specimens are deposited. And likewise, you can begin examining and exploring the genealogical social network, if you will, of co-collectors by virtue of the data that appear on Terry Irwin specimen records with the individuals who he has collected with in the past. And that this is lovely because it's immediately from the specimen data from GBIF, and not necessarily from anecdotes or publication records, but from the specimen data themselves. This active linking activity also helps us to better appreciate the impact of underrepresented individuals in our midst, in both past and present. Here's one example of Margaret S. Collins, who was an African-American child prodigy and later an entomologist specializing in the study of termites. She was also a civil rights advocate. Margaret was nicknamed the Termite Lady for her expertise on termites. She was one of the very first individuals to receive a PhD in entomology, and being an African-American herself, and the third African-American female zoologist, which is a remarkable accomplishment. A team of individuals have recognized the potential for examining these microhistories right within the specimen data themselves, and I've been doing deep dives into this kind of work and have established a number of educational resources for undergraduate students in this organization called CUBES, or the Quantitative Undergraduate Biology Education and Synthesis, CUBES for short. So I draw attention to this work, and you should go explore CUBES if you have undergraduate teaching duties and are thinking about how to incorporate this work into your specimen-based teachings. One of the goals for Bionomia is to have this volunteer work turn right back and go and reside back into the collections. So one of the data packages that get produced in Bionomia is something called frictionless data. And within these packages are zipped up CSV files. One of these is a unique list of the collectors and determiners of the specimen records. And another is who made the link and when they made the link. So you can have a sense of the confidence and the trust in terms of the links as they get made in Bionomia. And yet another one is a signal about potential issues with the way in which collecting event dates have been presented to the world via GBIF from your specimen-based data. Should those event dates happen before the birth date or after the death date of the linked up collector? So this might turn out to be quite useful for you. The ultimate outcome of doing this kind of round trip work is the ability for you to share your people names and their identifiers out through two relatively new terms in Darwin Core, one called recorded by ID and the other one called identified by ID. Nice complements to the terms that you're probably already familiar with, recorded by and identified by. So not only can you share the raw people names, you can also share their identity by virtue of the identifiers that are indicative of who they are and in a shared way. I'll hand it back over to you, Deb.
Now that we've learned a little bit more, we come back to why do this work? Take a step back and think about the motivations that we might have for figuring out who is who, for disambiguating people names through linking to shared concepts for their identity in a way that's open, an open data curatorial exercise. We finally land on some motivations. Some of these are individual, such as pride and reverence, but we're also motivated to empower our trainees when we have a simple way to draw attention to their efforts. And let's not discount the entertainment value. If we're honest about this, some of us do this while watching television because it often requires minimal cognitive effort and, frankly, it's fun. At another level, we could speak about institutional and organizational drivers that may align with things like key performance indicators. This novel participatory approach affords new visibility, efficiencies, and cross-department and cross-organization and institution coordination. Many collectors were and are generalist natural historians, depositing optics in multiple collections within and across institutions. A link to a collector made for one organization often benefits many others. And there are academic drivers. The disambiguation of people names and subsequent linking to their specimen records can assist with the production of data products, such as the more accurate georeferenced localities for collections of horseshoe bats, or to foster more inclusivity in systematics, underrepresented groups, for example, and training in open data best practices with a simple way to self-advocate. If you're excited about this and you'd like to get started, the next event you could take part in is round-tripping people identifiers in collection management systems. David is hosting and organizing this workshop, having asked those of us to come and talk about, and you might be one of those, about what's in your CMS or what vision do you have for doing this work in your CMS. Thanks for the link in the chat, David. With that, we have many people to thank. We hope you have motive. The people listed here from Chauvin, Sabina, Jennifer, Samantha, and Andrew, and all the people in the Biodiversity Data Task Group in Biodiversity Information Standards TADWIG, we must say thank you to them and many, many more. Thank you, and thank you, David.
Of authors of books and things, is this being linked into that? What large global kind of information on people identifies people?
You have to repeat it. Sorry.
So, the question is, so there's a lot of identifiers in the libraries community. Are these being incorporated somehow into the workflow that you're implementing with Bionomia?
I can take a stab at that one, sure. So I think the lovely thing is, and I think Siobhan might speak to this in a moment, is about the possibility of using Wikidata for this purpose. So if you have the Wikidata infrastructure as the go-to place where all of those many, many identifiers for people can be aggregated, then yes, in principle, you can make use of the identifiers for the library community, such as VF, for example. So I know the MCZ, or the MCZ, as it's called south of the border from me, would have VF as one of its preferred identifiers for people. So long as those appear in Wikidata, yes, they then would be aggregated among all the others that would be there because of made use of Wikidata for that purpose.
All right. Well, thank you so much. All right, next up, we have Tommy McElrath with who makes the most impact, aggregators, persistent identifiers, and why you should care where your collections data goes.
Swap it. How do we swap? Where's the mouse button? Here it is. There it is. Go over there. There we go. Thanks everyone for coming. So I'm going to be kind of going off a little bit from what we've been talking about before, and I want to give a collection manager's perspective on who makes the most impact in collections. And I'm mostly just going to be asking questions. This is not a research talk. This is observations I've made. And so just want to qualify everything I'm saying before I keep going. So before I even answer that question, I'd like to present a metaphor, which is collections data and where it goes. So if you think about individual specimens and us as small streams or sources of water that go into a river and then ends up in a larger lake that represents each of our collections, that's sort of our aggregated data from each specimen. And then that data eventually flows out to aggregators. There are lots of different ones out there. This is obviously not an exhaustive list, but just kind of keep this metaphor in mind as we're talking. But the real question I have is, how do we know which of those specimens and who is collecting those specimens is having the most impact in terms of citations, in terms of stuff that's coming back to us? And of course, this is all related to limited resources and talking about and telling administrators why keeping certain specimens is valuable. Hundreds of year-old specimens, they maybe got used a really long time ago, but sometimes people will claim they're not being used anymore. We don't need to keep them. So just to really briefly talk about our watershed, the INHS Insect collection where I'm at has about 2.7 million digitized specimens. We use TaxonWorks to digitize all of our specimens. We have a lot of tools to get stuff through the initial stages of that push to get things out. So we have removing stream debris. We have lots of tools to digitize specimens faster. And this whole entire section is mostly what collection managers and digitizers focus on, is how do we digitize faster? How do we get grants to digitize? All of this kind of stuff. So we have a cool slide digitizer. We have a cool thing that parses individual specimens on a grid. And we can parse individual sections of those from there. We have some really nice Darwin Core importers. This helps get our data out faster, so we can pull ecologist data as they donate specimens to us right from their data sheets they bring in along with their specimens. So again, pushing more specimens out faster. This is great. We can export that data and then it gets harvested by aggregators. And as Debbie and David just mentioned, we can actually include linkages via Darwin Core. We can include identifiers to trace the water as it goes out to wherever it's going in the watershed and out into aggregators. So we can include global unique identifiers on individual specimens, as well as our catalog numbers to link those there. We can actually see the difference of those in TaxonWorks between what we're uploading and what we're sending to GBIF, and how GBIF is interpreting that in TaxonWorks with a cool tool called GBIFerence, which I think is hilarious. And then on individual people, you can include different identifiers, mostly the two that David and Debbie just mentioned. But this lets us trace where these specimens are going. So just very practically, really quickly, how does this work on an individual specimen? So here's a tick that I unfortunately collected off of myself. And you can see right there, we have 3 different agents that all have identifiers. These are all in our database. And it was identified by one person. It's got a catalog number. It's got a GUID assigned by TaxonWorks. This was imported during the terrestrial parasite tracker project using one of those image importer tools. It was identified by Emily Struckoff. Then that got exported and it's now on GBIF. So we send all of our records to GBIF. And you can actually see using the cool Bionomia extension, our identifiers are on that specimen. I will say this is also kind of a Bionomia fan talk right after Bionomia's talk itself, so keep that in mind too. But getting the stuff out to GBIF or out to an aggregator is usually where collections people stop. I don't have any control at this point. And this is what I realized as I was coming up with this talk is how do we get past this? What happens after this? And what I like to think is that hypothetically, we're pushing all this data out there. We're spending millions of dollars on digitization in order to get back impact, getting back citations and metrics. And the question I have is, are the things we're pushing these things to giving us this back? So I very, very badly, I'll admit, I'm not a biodiversity data scientist in terms of coding or anything like that. I'm not building any tools. I'm just a collections manager who knows how to dissect beetle genitalia. So this is how I'm doing this. We built a Google Scholar tool to track INHS insect collection data sets. And this is all things that cite the INHS insect collection on Google Scholar. So I've been regularly curating this, adding papers, but this is notably just the things that cite the collection. This is not tracking individual specimens or people. It's up online, anyone can see it. We're getting lots of cool citations for this. This is a really cool tool. I use this when I'm talking about our impact, but there's lots of limits to this in that I don't have unique identifiers linking exact specimens to exact products. Typically, this looks like a specimen is collected, eventually databased, and then returned or identified. We digitize it, it goes out to GBIF. But then completely separately, someone uses that specimen who borrowed it, they email me a copy of that paper, and then I put that on our Google Scholar page and I can track the metrics. But those are parallel processes. These are not the same thing. And I think there's an issue there. This can happen very quickly. But I don't know if that specimen was ever used previously because it only got an identifier recently. So adding identifiers is really important there. This is obviously limited by a loan process or researcher time. This whole process of having people email me papers, we send out dozens and dozens of loans every year. I only got 9 papers from people emailing me last year. So citations will increase, but it's going to be indirect. And it's better if researchers cite a data set DOI. And this is where I've started to look at the aggregators that we're sending our data to and try to figure out if I can track how much impact we're getting from each aggregator. So we're sending stuff to IDBio, an internal Symbiota portal just for INHS data, and Scan, which is another Symbiota portal. And I will note that a lot of the tools that were talked about earlier in this very symposium are not on either of these Symbiota platforms. I don't know why. I'm not a Symbiota developer. We don't manage our data in Symbiota, so we don't get any of the benefits that were previously talked about. We're only using them as aggregators. And I tried to find any papers that mentioned the INHS insect collection that were downloaded from any of these aggregators. And I found a grand total of 4 new things that GBIF had not already found. So that's all manual, and I have to add those to Google Scholar. That is in contrast to our data on GBIF, where I get a custom tool that tells me exactly how many citations are being used, has individual DOIs for every download, tells me how many download events there have been, and I can go through and actually see how many papers are citing our collection DOI that's provided by GBIF every single year. And so there's a very different sort of level of it tracking that impact among these aggregators. And this, of course, is then bolstered and trying to get at that question I asked at the beginning, which was who and what is making the most impact. And we can do this through Bionomia. So if I look at that, I look at my profile, I can see that 1 tick. And if that's under the Science Enabled tab over there, I can see that this was actually cited by this paper right here for ticks of medical concern. I can go to the download of that data. I can see how many of INHS specimens were used in that paper. It's about 113. So I can now connect the dots in this circle here where I went from collected specimen, digitized, and then out to GBIF, and then I can use Bionomia and GBIF to figure out what papers we're using, and I can actually use that to talk about the impact that one specimen had. So importantly, we can make this process faster if we follow a bunch of steps. It can be as many as, like, it can be a decent amount of time before when you collect a specimen all the way till when it actually, you see that impact. It can be many, many years, but this can change. We're seeing lots of what I would call rain from GBIF. We're seeing this exponential growth of use of specimens, and I did not plan this, but earlier today, someone mentioned how we're seeing all kinds of new uses of our data from these GBIF citations. I'll talk about that just a little bit more in a second. But this is not limited by collection manager time. I have to do nothing other than stick our data on GBIF, and it's not something else I have to do to track these citations, which is really important as someone with very little time. But where does this break down? How do we make this happen more often? How do we get these citations faster? Or how do we make sure we get these citations when we send people data or specimens? So hypothetically, here's my best case scenario. Someone digitizes an awesome beetle that is determined by an awesome person. It's uploaded to GBIF, and this happens in 4 days, hypothetically. And technically you could do it all in an afternoon too. Then of course publishing happens, and who knows how long that takes. I'm definitely not going to talk about that in the purview of this talk. And then it comes back to us in terms of discovered and linked via Bionomia, and I'll add a month on there because David only refreshes the data set every month on Bionomia. But where does that break down? First off, if you send it to any other aggregator that doesn't provide you a DOI, how are you going to measure the impact of that specimen? Second, it's entirely possible that people who download specimens from GBIF do not use the DOI and actually cite that in their paper. I will say that GBIF is very good about putting that front and center and providing you with one in the first place. And so there is a huge, there's infrastructure there to support and encourage that happening as part of the community. It also breaks down when, so when you don't cite that DOI, and these are all the places I've seen data from GBIF used, and actually, this is also where I have seen data downloaded from our SCAN database or our INHS database used, and it's supposedly cited. First off, materials and methods is great. That's fine, at least it's in the paper. Same thing with acknowledgements. Or you put it in the supplemental files, which are not usually indexed. And then I've seen it completely stripped out of everything. So this is where this breaks down, is when you're not using those DOIs. So how do we actually make sure this water table is going? How do we keep this water cycle of data going? First off, I think collection managers and curators need to encourage people who borrow their specimens to directly cite their data set DOIs if they are putting them up on GBIF. We also need to ask ourselves why we don't have one of these, whether that's creating a data set DOI through Zenodo or GBIF. Make sure that you are using that and encouraging researchers to cite it whenever they actually use your specimens, so that you don't have to do more work to track your citations and your use of your specimens. In terms of publishers, I think they need to do a lot more in terms of making this better. I think they need to start requiring data management plans for things like grants. I think if anyone ever says data is on request from the authors, it should automatically be rejected. There is a paper that has data that is archived that specifically says that data is not available upon request. It is not significantly different from saying there is no data available for you to use. So it's a lie, basically. I think if you ever download data from an aggregator, you need to cite the individual data sets, not just the aggregator. I am somewhat annoyed when people do something like that and just cite the aggregator and not the people who are actually putting the data up on the different aggregators. And of course, follow FAIR standards, which are all involved in all of this. And I will say there are plenty of caveats to this. DBIF GOIs apparently cost a ton of server infrastructure money. It costs a lot of data or money to develop that infrastructure in the first place for other aggregators who are not doing this currently. More aggregators do mean more exposure, and a lot of other portals are very good at doing a very specific thing. There are other reasons for choosing a platform that is also an aggregator, and I'm not denying any of those. I'm running out of time here, but I am very quickly going to try to actually answer the question I asked at the very beginning, which is who in the IHS Insect collection is making the most impact? And this is through Bionomia and these tools. So T.H. Frisson was one of our first entomologists. His specimens are being used in 29 works that were downloaded from GBIF or that use the GBIF DOI with things like conservation, climate change modeling, disease vector range expansion. H.H. Ross, another entomologist with us, only 215 specimens used in 32 different works, all kinds of different ways. Chris Dietrich, one of our current curators, I made him a fun word cloud because I thought it was fun. 205 specimens used in 20 different works, conservation, species distribution modeling, all sorts of ways. K.F. Auden was originally trained in British Columbia, and he came to INHS to work, brought his beetle collection with us and with him, and unfortunately died a few years into his job at INHS, and we got his entire beetle collection. But he was only 30 years old, but his specimens are now still being used in lots of different ways. And this is one of my personal favorites. This is Leonora Gloyd, who was a odontologist, but also collected with her husband on herps and a bunch of other things. But then they separated halfway through her career, and her specimens are massively used all over the place. And she's barely talked about in terms of connections with INHS, even though most of her dragonfly and damselfly specimens are with us. So I think we're just beginning to try to figure out this question of who makes the most impact. I'll thank everyone who helped inspire this talk, and I will end there and tell you to cite DOIs.
Yeah, there's no time for questions, so we will keep going. Next up is Christy Bills with reuniting Uncle Joe with its specimens. How a security guard, some sleuthing, and crowdsourcing saved an orphan Lepidopteran collection from the dustbin of history.
A short title. Okay, I thought this was going to be in the symposium about power of people, so just think of it that way, a taste for tomorrow. This is a talk about a mystery in my collection that about an accession that it took me 4 years to solve, and I'm really excited that I solved it. And so I came here to tell you how I solved it, and maybe the tools that I used to solve it will help you with some mysteries in your collection, which I think we all have. This is the background. I work at the Natural History Museum of Utah. We're a University of Utah facility. This is the beautiful new building that we moved into in 2011. And excitedly, 3 years ago, we got a new executive director who is also an entomologist, and he's really great. One of the important parts of our team is our security guards. Speaking of the power of people, and Amy is the best security guard. She is an integral part of our collections and research staff. So she lets students in who forget their badges, but she keeps contractors out of our labs who are not supposed to be there. And she keeps an eye out for really interesting specimens that are roaming around the building, like on security cameras and stuff. And we really all have a lot of faith in her. So weirdly, about 4 years ago, she came to me and said that she had a butterfly and moth collection to donate that her mom had in the garage. And they had decided that instead of pulling the wings off of this butterfly and moth collection, Amy had noticed that these moths and butterflies had full data, and that maybe they should be in a museum instead of being used as a craft project. And I said, yes, I agree with you. And so she brought the specimens in, and we found there were almost 800
butterflies and moths that were collected in the 40s and the 50s in Southern California and into Mexico. And these Schmidt boxes, they had no domestic damage. But they also came with like 26 cigar boxes of paper specimens that were domestic damage. So cigar boxes, very temporary storage. The Schmidt boxes, so good. So they were labeled and identified, and they had cocoons, and they were lovely, but they had no good collector information. So that was the mystery that was driving me crazy. So I had volunteers count the specimens. I had a really great lepidopterist volunteer go through and corroborate the identifications. And then I began to dig into trying to figure out who in the heck collected all of these specimens. On the underside of the labels, which is not where we put our names, some of them said Richard Townsend, some of them said Joe Roberts, that's Roberds, but that was not sufficient. That was who did this. So of the pinned things, there were some Buprestids. There was one Schmidt box of Buprestids. So I turned to the guy who I talked to about Buprestids, which is Rick Westcott. And I said, dude, do you know some amateur lepidopterist, 40s and 50s, Southern California? And he scratched his head and told me no. So that was a dead end. He was not helpful. So then I kept looking for lepidopterists in the 40s and 50s, Southern California, and I found this cool guy, Lloyd Martin, and he was a curator at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles. And I was like, he's very interesting. Maybe he's my guy. So I reached out to the Los Angeles Museum, and they were like, no, that's not our guy. And also, that didn't make sense that somebody that worked at the museum would die and posthumously not have a destination for his collection. I was like, dang it, okay. So there they kept sitting in my office, waiting to be databased with no known collector. Oh. So finally I Googled Joe Roberts, and I found this very cool scanned minutes of the 1966 Pacific Slope Lepidopterist Society meeting. Read through it and found his name. So we've got him placed in 1966. And then I kept digging further, and I found these 1953 meeting notes where they would just post your address. So that's super great. There he is hanging out with other people. I think that like Paul Oppler is in some of these notes too, like people we've hung out with. So I got his address, and because I, like all of us, stalk dead people, I used another resource that I'm really, really fond of, which is my newspapers.com account. So unfortunately, I have to pay for this account. I've tried to circumvent this by going to my, large municipal library. They do not have this account. I've tried using my university library. They also do not have this account. So newspapers.com is super, super useful for looking up information in old libraries that might be useful for other museums. And I looked up his name, and I found an article about Joe Roberts in Redondo Beach, California. So I found my guy, and he was a violin maker. So I'm getting close, right? So I read through this article and look at this paragraph. This made me scream. Is that cool? Right? So for the people who can't see the slide, my mother had forced me to take lessons on violin to divert my attention from collecting bugs and butterflies. I was like, all right, I found my guy. This is for sure him. But what I really wanted to know was there living family members I could connect with? Are there field notes somewhere? Was he associated with the university? Was he associated with an extension service? Is there, what can I find out? When did he pass away? I had already looked for an obituary and I couldn't find one. So what more can I find? Can I connect with living family? Is there field notes? So I turned to the other way that I stalk dead people, which is Family Search, which I do a lot. It's very useful for finding information about collectors, so I highly, highly recommend it. You may or may not know that Salt Lake City is home to probably the world's foremost genealogy library, and most of the resources are available online for free, unlike a lot of other genealogy resources. It's crowdsourced, speaking to the power of people. It's wildly useful. You can find all kinds of information. It's information about deceased people only, so you can't stop living people, unlike Facebook. And you can look up yearbooks, you can look up immigration records, you can look up birth and death dates, you can look up all kinds of stuff. So I looked up Family Search, and I found not a Joe Roberts, but a Jewel Roberts. And I was like, oh, just like it's so close. I'm just nipping at the heels. This could be my guy or a family member because it's an unusual last name. Now, if it had been a Mark Smith or Joe, no offense. If it had been somebody with a name that was more common, I might not be able to find it. But luckily, I turned to the tab where they have photos, and under Jewel Roberts, it said Mom and Uncle Joe. And I was like, dude, oh my gosh, I'm such a detective. So the cool thing about Family Search is that you can contact people through the website. So this photo was only uploaded on June 17th of 2023. And the person who uploaded it, Stephen Davis, I was able to message that person and say, not to be weird, but I think I have your family member's butterfly collection. And it turned out to be Joe's nephew. And he was delighted. They didn't know how it had gotten away from the family. They had fond memories, and they were elated. Weirdly, he was also LDS, and this is the LDS sponsored website. I'm not, but they were really, really happy. They thought it was like divinely inspired that I connected with them. Unfortunately, no field notes, but I was able to get more biographical information about him and his family and connect. So I thought that was really important. This is what they were able to tell me about Uncle Joe. That he was a very sweet man. They gave me a lot of info about him. Cool. He was a security guard. So we circled back to security guards. So genealogy resources, very helpful. I also want to say that I just have a lot of respect for amateurs that come to our science. And I think that I love that our science is open to people who are young and old and self-taught. And I think these kinds of people can engender the sense of stewardship that our world really deeply needs. And I see it every day. And I just love that about it. I have a lot of fun for Uncle Joe and his family. One more step in this story is that we've been able to use the method that Cody spoke about earlier today with the turntable method for digitizing and photographing the specimens and put them on Digivol. And then his family has been able to volunteer to revisit the collection remotely and transcribe some of his labels. So people from all over the world have been able to type his labels, but especially his family's been able to revisit it. So I think that's really super sweet. So thanks to the Roberts family and to our security guard and to the many volunteers who counted, added catalog numbers, corroborated identifications, and to all the people who've been involved in dealing with this collection. Are there any questions? Yeah. Yeah, it was so hazy. I went to her many times and I was like, wait, how did you get this collection? It's so freaking weird. So what I think happened is Joe died and the family sold everything in an estate sale. So Amy's mom got it from a friend who died and was never able to tell me like how they obtained it. It was just like this weird hazy chain of events, which is so horrifying that people build a collection and don't have a repository agreement. So now whenever somebody tells me like, oh, so-and-so has a collection, I'm like, where do they plan to do with it when they die? Make a death plan, make a death plan. Yeah. Did you have a question too? Amy was much more sanguine about the whole thing. I was like jumping up and down, screaming, like, I found him, I found the family, it's so exciting. And Amy was like, okay, And I'm like, this is amazing, we're all connected now. They're from such a small place. It's so great. Anyway, yeah. Anything else? Yeah. If anybody wants to know how to use Family Search, I can also show you how I'm related to anybody in this room. So I'm 8th or 10th cousins with y'all, I promise. Okay. Our next speaker is Jackie Wisenhart, and they're going to talk about John G. Flankermont and A Life of Moths.
Hi again. Yeah, this is great. I will admit that I am not the best person to give this talk. Once again, there's a coleopterist here dipping their toes into other people's business. So I'm a beetle guy up here to talk sort of about moths. Sorry, but yes, I know there are folks here who knew Flankermont and or worked with him or were more closely associated than I was. I'm just a technician who's working with some of his collection and parsing it out and organizing things, but I would like to try my best. So yeah, John Flankermont, or Jack to his friends. So is one Jack to another. I appreciate you and I'll let you do. Yeah, he apparently he had a bit of a sense of humor, so I was really seriously considering another tagline to this talk, which encompasses almost the entirety of his work, which is dissecting moths. But yeah. So John Flankermont was a lepidopterist who, according as he liked to tell people, he was born on the day the Titanic sank, and yeah, that's very fun. But studied at Cornell and got his bachelor's in 1935. He studied under Forbes, also a famous moth guy, who took him under his scaled wing and made sure that he was really well entrenched in the wonderful world of little brown moths. When World War II came about in terrible ways, he enlisted and was a mosquito eradication specialist for many years, traveling around the Pacific Southwest, particularly the Solomon Islands and the Philippines and various other locations, where he was most definitely not just collecting mosquitoes. He collected massive amounts of moths and sent them back home, and kept building to that collection in just many different places and ways. So after that, he concurrently worked on his PhD and was an entomologist for the USDA at the Smithsonian, identifying noctuoid and geometroid moths, which were most definitely his specialty. There are so many. So part of this, part of both wanting to honor his legacy and then highlighting a recent project, fairly recent project that was endeavored to digitize some portion of his collection and make it available to the public for ways to either provide resources for DIY insect identification, both with these Kodachrome slide collections of various immature moths, and then associating them with the genitalia slides of the moths that he reared himself, and then associated drilled specimens. So most of this work has already been done. Again, I'm just kind of coming back in and finalizing the last little bits of that work that needs to be done here. But Kay Austin was the main person who was dealing with designing, orchestrating, carrying out, and fulfilling this particular grant. So what is in his collection? Surprise, it's moths. But this particular set of his collection used to be completely isolated from the rest of the Cornell collection. It was in its own bank of compactors. When it was moved in that 1983 and 4 and 5 move, it was still maintained separate from the rest of the holdings. And that was maybe due to departmental drama or whatever was happening there. I know there's lots of controversies or things where people don't get along, or they're like, I don't like the thing that you work on, so I'm not going to incorporate it, or whatever. So all of his particular specimens during his lifetime were stored in this whole other set, in lime green cabinets, I'm told, which sounds fabulous. So he has 350,000-ish immaculately pinned specimens. And when I say immaculate, I mean, you look at a box of these and there's not an antenna out of place. It's wild. And all the pins are exactly parallel. They are shingled to death, and makes me so nervous to look at them. But which definitely makes digitizing them hard because you have to disassemble very carefully, digitize and reassemble. That's a whole nother effort. But yes, gorgeous, completely amazing collections. I don't even know, man. There are thousands and thousands, 350,000 in fact, moths. And I know we're all looking at it. I know there's a blank spot. There's a reason. That particular specimen had been dissected. It had been, it was taken out for photographing for this particular project. It just had not been put back yet. But don't worry, it'll go back right exactly where it came from to complete that picture. Same with the other one. In addition to the adult specimens that together with the Forbes collection make the backbone of the Lepidoptera holdings of the Cornell University Insect Collection. Another aspect of this project was digitizing these Kodachrome slides of reared specimens that he maintained, many living colony or collections so that he could more accurately represent or document where the life cycles of the caterpillars of the moths that he loved. And there's again, many beautiful, just gorgeous slides. It might be a little presumptuous of me saying like, oh, wow, I can't believe these old slides look so good, but don't they? It's just amazing. And I will say in some of the accounts that I've been reading or the memoirs or memories of Frank Lamont, so many people say, oh, and then he was childless, blah, blah, blah. He didn't, have any children, which is fine. But also, no, he had hundreds and thousands of children because so many of these moths were raised from larvae or raised from eggs. It's just gorgeous. And they're all marked as such. And then lastly, as part of this project, there's 8,800 Canada Basson mounts that he made from a period. The very first one was marked at 1935. The very last one was made in 1994. So over the course of his entire life was making these just very meticulous, very well, beautifully labeled, I love his handwriting so much, mounts of insect genitalia or moth genitalia, mostly of the Noctuoidea, that he loved so much. And yeah, just sometimes they would have, it was just the genitalia. Most of the slides are double mounted, so they have the genitalia and the remainder of the abdomen, just so you're not removing any material, I guess. So yeah, cases and cases and cases of these to be scanned and digitized. So within a typical representation of what we would like to see happen with the online portal, we have the genitalia, we have the adult missing that abdomen, as we saw in Lauren's talk, and then the images of the collection, the data, the labels, the little thingies on the pins. And if some of those, again, if they're reared from specimens, we also have Kodachrome slides to link with those because they were each specimen, like that Kodachrome slide is that particular specimen, which was then dissected. So it makes a whole full set of looking at the life and times of these moths. Something that we're going back through this project, which is mostly completed, we're going back through and assigning barcodes and doing just any extra digitization for the material here. So getting a little bit of a whole slide scan as well as getting them into a database more than just the Excel file that they were in before. That is publicly accessible right now. There's still material being uploaded to this particular gallery, but on the COSC website, there's under their Frank Lamont slides or just genitalia slides tab, you can explore anything from Acadia to Zopica and see them in high detail. And higher resolution images that are on the website are available upon request. And so there's a QR code that will take you right to that page. You can search by if you want to just look at slides, if you just want to look at Kodachrome slides, you can search under those categories as well as by genus or species. One thing that I did find or just notice in looking at some of, or looking into John Frank Lamont's interactions with other folks and their memories of him, was just how much he was invested in teaching and mentorship. And I do find that to be really, really meaningful, to be an engaged instructor and a thoughtful teacher and a supportive mentor is such an important legacy that can impact generations of students, and who clearly did. Most of the people, whether it's the family friends that that I interviewed, or again, the memoirs that I read, who were always commenting on how kind he was. Even if he didn't let people touch his specimens, his knowledge was freely given. And he would go home for dinner, come back late at night, and stay into the evening hours to be available for student questions and to mentor folks who brought their interest and their curiosity to the collection. And he does remind me of some of the greatest mentors that I've had in my life and how they changed me for the better. And I do invite you to think about folks who have impacted you in similar ways, because it really makes a difference. But he was also a classical music aficionado, and he loved his little dogs, which went on him on his many, many trips, many trips to 6 Mile Creek in Ithaca, where most I see that on the label data so many times. But you know that when he was collecting those moths, his little dogs were also there, scooting around the underbrush. I find that incredibly charming. With that, I do want to thank all the folks who I talked to. I know I didn't make an exhaustive list of everybody who knew him, but if you do have stories or memories or things that you'd like to share, I would love to hear them, because it's been such a fun historical kind of exploration of Frank Mott's life and work. Thank you very much.
We have any questions?
I have a couple questions. So for those photochrome pictures, do you have multiple instars? Are there any identifiers for those instars? Which instars?
Oh yes, thank you. The question was, for the Kodachrome slides, are there multiple instars or tags of what instar level this was? Unfortunately, no. That would be so wonderful to have an entire timeline from egg to adult. I'm not quite sure how expensive Kodachrome was in the day, but I think he was prioritizing getting multiple views of a mature larva, not mature, like still immature, of fourth, fifth star in Charlotte, an older larva that you can see a lot of identifying characters. So prioritizing have a lateral and a dorsal and any sort of like leaf damage characteristics. Those seem to be the priorities of what the Kodachrome slides were showing, but man, that would be great.
And have the host records. So I saw leaves associated with those larvae. So have those records been attached as well?
That is I believe it's on the Kodachrome slide. I have to double check to see if that's been put into the website or the database. I would certainly hope so, but yes. Yes, thank you. Yes. Ainsley asked, how are those beautiful genitalia imaged? And so if we go back, yeah, these lovelies. We have a stacking system, just it's a DSLR Canon with just regular stacking software. Zurine Stacker is what we use. So with the genitalia, we'll take, oh Lord help me, 500 slides. How many?
I figure out the tiny little moths, I do like 500 to 600 shots.
500 to 600 shots per level. And then Zurine Stacker will do the rest of the work to knit them all together into a beautiful, all in focus, teeny tiny little moth baby. Oh, there's one more question.
Yeah, you say 500, then they stitch together, one stack, 500.
One stack, oh, the question was how, when you say 500, are they stitched together or is it one stack 500 deep? I believe, if I'm understanding you correctly, yes, 500 deep stack from start to finish, I guess, to get a really nice, crispy, clean image.
And the measures that takes one picture.
Laura, Luke was asking how long does it take to take that stack of 500 images?
I said about 20 more to stitch them together.
20 minutes to physically take the pictures and 20 minutes more to stitch them together. Woohoo. Thank you so much.
Okay, so our last talk of this section is pre-recorded and is by someone who is all the way in New Zealand. This is Siobhan Lichman with Connecting Entomological Collectors through the Wikiverse.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you to the organisers for inviting me to speak with you today. If you don't already know me, my name's Siobhan Lichman and I'm a Wikimedian. I edit multiple different wiki projects, including English Wikipedia, the data repository Wikidata, and the image repository Wikicommons. I'm also a Binomia scribe, so I use the website binomia.net to digitally link collectors of specimens to the specimens that they've collected. I've added all sorts of information and links in my slides, so feel free to use the bit.ly link or the QR code to find out more. Today I want to show you how I research entomologists and how I link them to their contributions. This slide shows the general workflow I use to improve knowledge about entomologists. I'm going to explain this workflow to you and also hope to give you an idea of why I do this work and how it can be used to benefit entomological collections. Now, as a New Zealander, I'm obliged to work some sort of reference to the Lord of the Rings into my presentation, and this is it. Of all the projects I contribute to, the one project to rule them all is Wikidata. Now, Wikidata is an openly licensed, multilingual, linked knowledge base. To give you an indication of how huge this knowledge base is, when I last checked, Wikidata had over 6.3 million people items alone. Wikidata can be edited by both people and machines and is constantly being enriched and improved. It also links to multiple other databases, so it acts as a database hub. Wikidata can be queried and can be used to answer questions which might otherwise be really difficult to find a result for. And all the data in Wikidata is CC0 licensed and so can be reused by anyone for anything. But importantly for my work, Wikidata is where I can add my research findings about entomologists and where I can then link them to such things as their co-collectors, the institutions that hold their collections, to their scholarly publications, and to databases and websites that contain further information on them. Let me take you through my workflow step by step. First, I have to find an entomologist. Now, I can do this in a variety of ways. I often come across people while researching other collectors in scientific literature placed in digital repositories such as the Biodiversity Heritage Library. Alternatively, I could come across a collector when I'm transcribing entomological labels in citizen science websites such as Notes from Nature or the Atlas of Living Australia Digivol project. I can come across entomologists through museum websites. Another method I use to find people is via Binomia. Now, Binomia is a website developed by David Shorthouse to ensure that collectors or scientists who identify specimens get recognition for their work. Binomia uses the data natural history organisations have shared with GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. So I go to Binomia and then go to the Dataset tab. I then search for the name of a particular entomology dataset which has been uploaded into GBIF by a natural history organisation. I then click on the Binomia profile for that dataset. So in the slide, you can see images of both the GBIF and the Binomia profiles for the Auckland Museum Entomological Collection dataset. I then go to the Agent Strings tab in the Binomia profile for that dataset, and this will give me a list of raw, unconnected names of specimen collectors that have been listed on all the specimens in that dataset. And these names are not linked and need disambiguation. That is, someone needs to come along and work out who these names relate to, and often that someone is me. Now, I particularly like working on women. By researching women entomologists and their contributions and then placing these data into the wiki ecosystem, I'm aiming to improve the coverage about these women. I'm also giving other researchers, as well as institutions that hold the collections of these women, the opportunity to reuse these data and to work on them. So once I've got the name of an entomologist, I then go about researching that person. I normally start with a plain Google search, and then I'll move on to a full text search of the Biodiversity Heritage Library to see if they're mentioned in any publications there. I may do a full text search of the Internet Archive, hoping for such things as a yearbook result. And then I'll go along to genealogical websites such as Find a Grave or Family Search in order to see if I can find their birth and death dates. And while I'm doing my research, I'll either create a new Wikidata item for that entomologist, or I'll enrich their existing Wikidata item. I'll add statements and references supporting those statements. Here you can see the Wikidata item for the entomologist Wilmette Cockrell and just some of the statements on her Wikidata item. To get an idea about how much data can be added to an entomologist's Wikidata item, here's just some of the properties that can be used. Now, each of these statements can link the entomologist to other items in Wikidata. And it's this linking that's important because it creates this web of knowledge about the entomologist and their work. And the Wikidata item can also be linked to identifiers created by other databases for that entomologist. Identifiers like library identifiers, identifiers for archives or biographical databases, museum identifiers, genealogical database identifiers, the list just goes on. And by adding these institutional identifiers to Wikidata, Wikidata then becomes this hub linking to numerous institutions that hold information on that entomologist. And remember, my aim for doing all this work is to make sure that these entomologists get credit and recognition for their contributions. So when undertaking this research, I prioritize finding two really important pieces of information. If the entomologist is living, I really want to find their orchid identifier. If the entomologist is deceased, I want to find their death date. And the reason I do this is because I want to add the entomologist to Binomia. To do this for a living entomologist, as I've explained, I need their orchid identifier. Now, ORCID is a non-profit organisation that allows living people to register and create a persistent digital identifier for themselves. That ORCID identifier distinguishes that person from every other person. And this is the reason Binomia uses ORCID identifiers for living people. However, if the entomologist is deceased, I will need a Wikidata item that has a death date statement on it. Once I've got this information, I can manually add the entomologist to Binomia and then start attributing specimens to them. Now, this attribution work will then create a Binomia profile for that entomologist. And the Binomia profile shows things like the countries they collected in and the dates they did their collecting. It gives a visual summary of the collecting and identifying work of that entomologist. And the profile also shows who the entomologist collected with, and it can also give an indication of the scientific impact of the entomologist's collecting or specimen identification work. The Binomia profile can do this because GBIF generates a digital object identifier or a DOI for every download of specimen data. And when researchers cite this DOI in their research publication, GBIF can link that publication to the downloaded data set, which of course includes all the specimens that are contained in that data set. And because Binomia digitally links those specimens to their collector or the person who identified those specimens, the scientific impact of that collecting or identifying work by the entomologist can in turn be linked to the scientific research that used those specimens. So for example, here you can see 17 specimens collected by the entomologist Marjorie Towns that were contained in a GBIF dataset, and that dataset was used in research that helped generate a 2022 publication. Now, the Binomia profile can also tell you what institutions hold specimens collected or identified by an entomologist. And this information can then be added to the entomologist's Wikidata item via a Collection Items Act statement. And this is important because it can really help the Natural History Institution to become better connected in the Wikiverse and it can also inform the institution whose work is in their collections. And if the collector or identifier is deceased, I can then, once I finish my attribution work, make their collector profile in Binomia public and add that Binomia identifier into Wikidata. So at this point in my workflow, the entomologist is in Wikidata with reference statements about them and their work, as well as connections to other databases, including a link to Binomia, which in turn links the entomologist to their collecting or specimen identification work. And because the entomologist is in Wikidata, internet search engines can find this information. Natural history institutions can also download, reuse, or link to this data. For example, in the middle here, there's a screenshot of Te Papa Collections Online showing that they link to Wikidata in their website and also in their collection management system. And this linking can help improve efficiencies of their own disambiguation work with their own collections. And because the entomologist is in Wikidata, they'll also be placed on a Wikipedia editor articles needed list. Now, Wikipedia notability criteria is much higher than the Wikidata notability criteria. But by summarizing and linking information about the entomologist in Wikidata, I hope to help inspire more secondary sources to be written about that entomologist and their work, which can in turn result in that entomologist hurdling the Wikipedia notability criteria and enabling a Wikipedia page to be written about them, which again increases the profile of that entomologist and their work. So if you're keen to attempt to join in and undertake any steps in this workflow for yourselves, I've added some helpful links in the slide to assist you in your linking journey. Again, see the bit.ly link or the QR code at the bottom of the slide to obtain access. So thank you for listening, and I'm extremely happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Okay, do we have any questions for Siobhan? Nope. Any questions? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for listening to all these talks. I think, well, we clearly highlighted the work of a bunch of entomologists today and how that trace of their work still has an effect on our work every day. So with that, we close this section, but don't forget that after the break, we have the business meeting at 5:30, and then at 7:30, we have the reception where you need to bring your badge in order to be able to enjoy dinner with everyone in here. Thank you, everyone, but thank you especially to all our speakers, in particular to our ECN officers that on top of organizing a meeting, took time